So good afternoon. It's 4:01 on Monday afternoon. Glad to have you here. We'll give it just a minute to let people log on. Hope everybody survived the snow okay. Richard, Representative Atro, good afternoon. I'm going to start and talk about Mary, good afternoon. I'm going to start a Facebook page somewhere at some point that's just called Mary Grandy Jokes. And it'll just be puns and very G-rated jokes. Every time you see a joke online, if it's incredibly G-rated, it's a Mary Grandy joke. Play on words or something along those lines. But it's good to be back. I hope everyone had a good weekend. Wasn't snowed in too long. We was actually plowed out pretty good. This was like a really beautiful snow. It was fluffy. It was fun to play in kind of thing. So it was a good weekend. Overall, the Super Bowl was pretty much a dud, but that is what it is. I wasn't surprised. Usually, watching, everybody knows I'm a Giants fan, watching the Giants win their Super Bowls, it's about who's hot at the right time. And the Bucs were hot as hell. They were hot, and they did something, and the Giants did this when they won their 2 Super Bowls. They had a pass rush, an unbelievable pass rush that can rein in an offense. So we saw that yesterday. It was over. I'll be honest with you. I barely watched the fourth quarter. The game was pretty much over. The Chiefs couldn't get the ball moving, and so that was that. I didn't watch. I think this was my least involved Super Bowl in probably ever. I don't know why. I just didn't care. So even on the commercials, the one that jumped out at me was that Toyota one with the adopted girl who didn't have her legs. That was phenomenal. But other than that, I didn't watch a ton of them. So, but the weekend's over, and the snow looks good. Tomorrow, the weather is supposed to be bad again. So hopefully we have some connection. We can come live tomorrow, and we'll talk about some things then. But a couple of things on our agenda today. We want to talk primarily about the stimulus, but I do want to talk about an issue that we mentioned a few months back when it comes to Robinhood and trading, and so many people getting into online trading. And there's a story out of let me see what town this is. Story out of, his name is Alex Kearns. Doesn't say the city, but 20-year-old Alex Kearns took his own life last June, mistakenly believing he'd lost $750,000 in a risky bet on Robinhood. And the reason I bring this up is because in talking about stocks and in talking about investing, I've had some parents contact me and say, listen, my kid does this. Do you have any advice? I'm not a financial advisor. My advice is generally to be smart, do research into companies. But part of my advice will also be what I'm about to say. When you open up an investment account, when your son or daughter opens one up and they're 14, 15, 16, whatever it is that they start, that's great. You want to get them in those habits. But buying and selling stock is not just buying the stock to go up or down. There are many, many other financial mechanisms at place. There are things like buying options. There are buying on margin. And margin, for example, is if you put $10,000 in, you can trade with about $40,000. If you buy an option, you can lose a lot of money. Sometimes lose more money than you actually have in your account. And so a large part of financial literacy, I know it's fun to just jump in and look at these stocks and buy and sell and look at what we saw with GameStop in the last 2 weeks. And people made millions, but people also lost a fortune. And there are so many other financial mechanisms that play a huge role in the market. So if your son or daughter, or if you are getting involved, take some time first and understand what those mechanisms are. It's interesting. If you go back to the financial crash in 2008, things like credit default swaps, which the average person has no idea really what they are. Different tranches in mutual funds and in so many other financial creations that are done that are legit. They work, but you have to know what you're doing, and you have to know when to get in, when to get out, or else you could be on the hook for things, or you could temporarily think you're on the hook for something you're not on the hook for. The reason this is a story, and I will post this on Brandford 7, this young man thought he had lost $750,000. And that night on Robinhood received an email saying you had to pay something like $180,000 in the next day or two. And he ultimately sent an email to Robinhood, didn't hear back, got nervous, and took his own life. It turned out that he actually didn't owe that money. He may have owed it temporarily, which is not unusual in margin. If you get a margin call, and I've gotten these, where a stock goes down and they say you suddenly have to pay $5,000, $10,000, but there are other things at play in your current stock portfolio that will offset that. So it's like, okay, no problem. I get that. This young man did not understand that. So before you tell your kid, hey, let's jump in, get involved, open that account, whether you're a kid or an adult, understand and limit the things you can do early on. They're going to ask you if you want a margin account. Say no. Yes, I have a margin account, but I know what I'm doing. In general, say no, learn what you're doing, and a few months down the road, you might want to add that. Options, you want to buy and sell options, put that off for now. So when I talk about stocks that I purchased, I'm only talking about things I'm buying long. I'm not talking about margin. I'm not talking about options. And if you're going to get involved, and more people are, Robinhood is one of those retail trading platforms where kids are getting involved. And we want that. We want them involved. We want them to know how to read stocks, know how to look at what the market's doing, the impacts of a headline on the financial markets, what economics is. That's all good. But there are dangers involved as well. And you can limit those dangers by not signing up for all the things that company wants you to sign up for. Say no, just trade on cash. You can't lose more than that. And this is an awful story that they had a son who was trading, who was learning, who was studying, got nervous, didn't hear back from the company quick enough, and thought he owed $180,000 in a day or two. And not that that's a reason to ever commit suicide. There's no reason to commit suicide, but as a young person, they overreacted and that happened. So be careful. And if you know somebody that is getting involved, starting an investment account on their own, advise them to keep it simple. Don't jump into all the exotic other trading that exists out there if you don't fully understand it. So that's just a little warning, but it is a heartbreaking story. We want kids to be involved. We want them to research. We want them to see how this works. Before I came here, I was talking to two young people at a local restaurant who were getting involved, just putting $50 in an account, wanted to know where to start. We talked about some basics, but certainly don't sign up for options. Don't sign up on margin. These companies, that's how they make their money. Their margin is essentially the company loaning you money. And if you're day trading and you're trading for an hour, sometimes a minute or two, I've bought a stock and sold it 2 minutes later. You may borrow that $30,000 for that 2 minutes and it goes back and it's a minuscule amount, but you have to know what you're doing. And if you don't, and you can see numbers that are, whoa, you owe $20,000 in a fee, it may not be accurate overall, but for that second as a kid, you may not fully understand what's going on. So it's a scary thing to see. That story is heartbreaking as someone who consistently promotes, get involved, research it, understand the market. That's one of the dangers that always exists. All right, so let's move on to the stimulus package. And the good news is we are likely going to have a significant stimulus. 1.9 trillion was a number the Democrats are putting forward. And while Biden did meet with Republicans, it appears that he is a little wary of letting ongoing negotiations kind of continue. And with good reason. If we remember back what happened last year, Pelosi put out a plan, a stimulus package, which was too big. And too big primarily because they were putting unrelated items in that stimulus package, like marijuana items in that stimulus package. But the Republicans, instead of countering, just didn't do anything. And they allowed unemployment benefits to expire. And that had a significant impact economically. So I could see why Biden's saying, no, I'm not doing it. There was a discussion about lowering that $1,400 payment. Remember, that $1,400 payment is really the second half of what was to be a $2,000 payment. We all got our $600 if you make under $75,000 a year. So he won't give on that. It does appear that the $15 minimum wage is not going to be in this stimulus, primarily because there's a legal question on whether they can do that with the mechanism they're using. Now, I have spoken against that, and it's not being against $15 minimum wage. It's against being $15 nationally. And we have to understand we are a nation of 50 small companies, of 50 small countries. And those countries have very different aspects to them, very different cost of living. $15 in Connecticut and $15 in Alabama is not the same thing. And so I looked at that as passing that. I had two issues with it. One, a national wage that high can have significant impacts in lower cost of living states like Alabama or southern states. The second one is a fundamental question of if we're passing what we're calling a relief bill to counter this pandemic, should we be throwing items that aren't directly related to that relief in there? And that's a question that I have. And I fundamentally believe that should be a separate argument, a separate process. Let that play out in its committee. Let it play out in its hearings. If you can pass it, great. And if you can't, it's a different bill. I don't want to throw everything into one thing, hoping we can pass it under the guise of relief for COVID, because it really isn't. It's a long-standing political agenda. The other aspect of this, which is interesting because Romney came out with his proposal last year. So, by the way, you can start telling which Republicans are going to run for president in 4 years by who's putting their name on a bunch of bills now. And so now the bills are discussing child tax credit as part of the stimulus, a child tax credit. So you may remember back, Bill Clinton made significant changes to our welfare laws. And part of that was requiring that before people can get welfare at certain levels, they had to work. They had to have some income. And so and it was Republicans wanted that. Bill Clinton gave in on that one. Bill Clinton, by the way, gave in on a bunch of stuff that wasn't necessarily good. But this is, welfare reform kind of, everybody was for, they got it. There were some issues there, but for the most part, it was considered a positive thing that Bill Clinton did. And it required people who it was thought, from a talking point standpoint, were living off the government, that if they were going to get child credits, significant aid from the government, that they had to work. There's an incentive to get them back to work to get some of these benefits. That said, some of the poorest, who either couldn't work or weren't in a position to work, weren't getting the full benefits. So you really ended up with people often in the middle class or to lower middle classes getting these benefits when the really poor with children weren't getting the full benefit. So one of the things that's come up now as part of the stimulus package, and Romney has proposed a version, is increasing the child tax credit. Although in this case, instead of doing it as a straight tax credit, doing it as direct payments. So the numbers, I want to make sure I get this right before I do this. We're looking at the Democratic plan anyway, is Democrats want to expand the credit to as much as $3,600 per child from the current $2,000, allow the needy to claim the entire break regardless of how much they make. So the poorest would get the full amount of that. It's $3,600 per child annually. So if you have 2 or 3 kids, you can have $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 and would be paid in monthly installments. So you get a check every month for $700, $800 if you had a couple kids. That's helpful, no question about it. What I don't buy is the argument, and I've read it in 4 or 5 articles, and they all use these words: it is projected to cut child poverty in half. I do not understand how that's possible. And so when I did some research on this, it appears it's coming from, I want to look this up and make sure I have this right, a study called The Potential Poverty Reduction Effect of President-elect Biden's Economic Relief Proposal. This was presented January 14th, 2021. And in this proposal, they look at and they say now remember, we had a December stimulus and we had what's going to be a February or March stimulus. So without the December stimulus, U.S. population, the poverty rate was 13.6%. 13.6% of the population in poverty. At that time, without that stimulus, it was 15% for those under 18. 18 to 64 is 12.9%, and 65 and up. 65 and up is 14.6%. Remember that 65 and up is often on fixed income. So poverty is often the money coming in, not necessarily the money that you have. With the December relief, they're claiming that the U.S. population poverty rate went from 13.6%, and with that $900 billion plan that passed, it was reduced to 12.6%. I'm not sure how we get these numbers. And I'm not sure I agree with the methodology here. But here's the number they're using to say they'll cut child poverty in half. They're saying that with that $900 billion passage, those under 18 were at a 13.4% poverty rate. That's certainly high. With this new proposal, with this $1.9 trillion plan, with the $1,400 checks, and with that child tax credit paid monthly, it will reduce poverty rate in children to 6.6%. I don't buy it. And I guarantee you, a year from now, if this passes, and 2 years from now, there's no way that'll be the case. I do not buy that the difference between poverty and not poverty is an extra $6,000 or $7,000 a year. It doesn't make sense. That's not enough to get you an apartment. It's not enough to get you a significant increase in living. And that's also saying that there's a bunch of people that are living just a couple $1,000s below the poverty line. I just don't buy it. Do I think this helps? Yes, I think it helps. I think that's why you're getting bipartisan support. Mitt Romney put out a plan for this. Clearly, I would put money on the fact that Romney is going to run for president. And I would put money on the fact that we would probably win in 4 years. The only reason Romney didn't win is he ran against Obama. He was probably one of the second best candidates to run for office in the last 15, 20 years. If he runs, I think he's a good chance of winning. I got to get past the Mormon thing, the magic underwear crap, but whatever. That said, there is bipartisan support for making this. In fact, Marco Rubio put out one that was higher, even more than a Democrat. So there's support for this, and the support for this is valid. While I don't believe it cuts poverty in half, we've talked about this before. If you want to stimulate the economy, give poor people money. No question. At the end of the day, poor people spend it. You don't have to worry about if people are hoarding it. They're going to spend it. It works every single time. In our town, in our state, in our country, the poorer someone is, the more money you give them, the more they're likely to pass it. Bob Rosa DeLauro was on MSNBC this morning talking about the impact. Rosa DeLauro, that has been her calling card for a long time. She's talked about child poverty for a long time. Will giving more money help? Yes. The tagline they're using, cutting child poverty in half, I don't buy that. Especially since the many, many people who work in the food industry, which is decimated, movie theaters, which are decimated, those people making lower incomes, many of those people are in that poverty line. So unless they're suddenly getting a job back, even an extra $6,000 or $8,000 isn't going to help them get above that poverty line. Will it help? Yes. And it helps the economy. Poor people spend money. Middle class, they have a decision to make. So if you are you're a family of four and you're making $100,000 a year, two people making 50 grand, not a great salary, but good salaries. And you suddenly get a check for $1,400 a person. So what is that? $5,600. You get to decide if I'm going to spend this money or if I'm going to save this money or put it in an investment account. Those are your options. Spending the money immediately is a boost to local businesses, right? Saving the money isn't quite a boost. It may go in a bank account. They may lend it out. They may not. We don't know. But either way, it's a percentage point on it. Investing the money may or may not. You can buy stock that does well, go in a company that does well. But you have that option. If you're a family of four that's making $40,000 a year with two kids, and you get that $5,600, that will be spent. Likely locally, if not Amazon, but it'll be spent. And a strong economy is based on the movement of money. When you are passing a stimulus, you want to do as much as you can to get money in people's hands that will spend it, not hoard it, not necessarily save it, spend it. Remember, after 9/11, the first thing George Bush said when he was standing in New York City, come to the city and spend money. Help it survive. Spending that money, giving it to people that will spend it works. So the idea of the child tax credit is great. The idea that we take it from just being a tax credit at the end of the year, which benefits those that pay taxes, and not necessarily those that aren't paying taxes, don't have the money for taxes, and make it a monthly payment makes a lot of sense. It's a much better stimulus. It helps the economy. So it helps those with kids, and it serves as a stimulus at a time when we desperately need it. Do I believe for a second it will cut child poverty in half? No. That's bumper sticker politics. That's putting something out there, trying to pass it when you may not need bumper sticker politics here. I think if you just talk to people logically and explain what I just said or what Romney has said, and hopefully what Rosa said, and then took out the bumper sticker nonsense, it's a valid argument. It's hard for anybody to argue against poor people spending money. It's definitely hard for anybody to argue against giving money to people who, especially poor people who have kids, and making sure they have food on the table and a roof over their head. But I'll tell you this, and I'll go back to my financial literacy aspect here. There are reasons people are poor. Lack of ability, lack of jobs, what have you. But there are also people who are poor, who are really bad with money, who have no idea how to save money. There are people who don't have anything saved who actually can make a decent living. And so part of what we have to go back to is making sure people understand how to save, how to prioritize, potentially how to invest. Nobody knows that. And the people who need that the most are the last people who are likely to get that education. I would like to see the state, the federal government, maybe even a townwide project. That's something I would discuss certainly along the shoreline of financial literacy beyond what we see in school. The school might teach you how to write a checkbook. I don't know, but we don't really need it anymore. What we need to learn is how to prioritize money. Every dollar I spend at a restaurant is a dollar I'm taking from something else, taking from rent or mortgage or food or from investing. That's a decision I've made. When someone says I have nothing saved and they're out to eat, or they have a $500 pocketbook on their arm, or they've gone to a sporting event, they've made a decision not to save. The implication is they didn't have any money. The truth is, more often than not, they've chosen to prioritize something else besides saving. And so it's great to give out money. Yes, right now it's a time that we should be. The larger the stimulus, the better. It will have a better impact. It will help the economy. It will get spent. Every dollar that's spent is taxed. It goes back to the government. Not a bad system. Long term, however, if we're going to keep all these child tax credits as a permanent law, as a permanent process, we also have to begin thinking about how do we properly educate people on what to do with money and how to prioritize money, and understand that every single cent I choose to spend on one thing, I'm taking it from something else. It's a hard lesson for a lot of people, but I would feel better. I think a lot of the Republicans out there might feel a little bit better, but in general, we should all feel better if we, instead of demanding you must be working at a certain amount of hours in order to get this stuff, the same way we send people through, training once they get pulled over for a DWI, they have to go to classes. If they're going to go through bankruptcy, they have to go through a financial class. If they're going to start getting government aid, let's mandate, and maybe this is just for everybody, a basic financial literacy class. Because I tell you my experience, and everybody asks me about financial literacy. Everybody asks me about stocks. Everybody asks me about investing. And I'm by no means a world-class investor. But once people start seeing the positive impacts of saving, once people start seeing the choices they have, that they can go back to school and take a class, or try for a better job because they have some freedom. When they have nothing saved, they don't have that freedom. So I love all the ideas here that we're hearing about a child tax credit. Yes. Getting money to poor families, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year, a minimum income for poor families, those with kids, great. But let's also make sure we're offering literacy so that they understand what to do with it, that it's spent the right way. Because the goal is, as it was for Bill Clinton, to make sure it's a path out of poverty, as opposed to an excuse to stay in it. Now, I see all over the place. This is why so many people work in the cash area. In order to get SNAP benefits, food stamps, so many other benefits that the states have, you can't make over a certain amount of money. So I know a bunch of waitresses that I know well that try to work under the table to a certain extent because they can't make over a certain amount of money. That's a terrible plan. I want you working more. And the benefits can't be cut this equal amount of the extra hours. So if somebody's making $19,000 a year and getting $5,000 in benefits, well, we can't say, okay, if you made $22,000, we're only going to give you $2,000 in benefits. No. Give it leeway up to $35,000, $40,000 to still get their benefits. There are so many people that are not working hours, not taking hours because they can't get over a certain amount of earnings a year. That's crazy. We need to change that. All of these programs only work if they're creating a path out of poverty. I'm for the programs. Strictly from an economic standpoint, I'm for the programs. Poor people, you give them money, they spend it. I want to make sure they're spending it the right way. All right, some of the questions here. Any realistic chance they cancel some federal student loans? There's enormous pressure on Biden to do that. I don't think it's a top priority. I think their next priority is going to be infrastructure, but we'll see. I know there was one plan to cancel 50,000 in student loans. There was one canceled 10,000 in student loans. I don't know the answer for you. I don't know that I would support $50,000 in student loans being cut. There is an unfairness factor there. All these people who have gone to school and then suddenly, somebody just finishes paying off their student loans and they're 35 and they put off buying a house and they put off doing all these other things to pay off their student loans, and suddenly someone who's 22 gets $45,000 in student loans forgiven. That's kind of a stab in the back, right? It feels awful. I'm not sure that could ever pass anyway, but wouldn't be shocked if around 10,000 did pass. Rob, who's going to foot the bill for these canceled student loans? Okay, so we'll go back to that. I don't have an answer for that. Again, it's always going to come back to taxing the wealthy more. The question is, I don't mind taxing the wealthy more for a child tax credit, right? The wealthier people, money goes to people that we know are going to spend it quickly. It all goes back anyway, right? That person spends money on food for their kids or spends money on rent. Where does that money go? To the landlord. That landlord spends it on more in corporations, to Amazon. Eventually, it flows up to the wealthier people. That's just how it works. And then we tax and we make sure that bottom people have money again. And that's a circle that keeps going. Hopefully, some people in that lower level of the circle get into the higher level eventually and work and get educated and use that money as a stepping stone to the point that they're a little bit higher on that circle, a little bit higher on that circle, then generationally get even higher. Victoria, when I graduated from BHS over 10 years ago, there was an elective for personal financial management. I wish it was required. I agree. Now, one is personal financial management, and that is how to handle like household income. But we also, as part of our financial training, has to be how to invest. How many people know the difference between a stock and a mutual fund? I'm not asking the people watching this podcast, but in general, what percentage of the population do we believe knows the difference between a stock and a mutual fund? I say it's less than 10%. How many people know what a PE ratio is? I hear kids all the time talking about, I want to buy that stock, Amazon, but it's too expensive. That's not what expensive means when you're buying stock. A $10 stock can be incredibly expensive. A $3,000 stock can be incredibly cheap because based on future earnings. So basic financial investment fundamentals are not something kids are learning. And if you take a kid and you have him save $1,000 and he goes on, I use TD Ameritrade, but he goes on Robinhood and he buys some stock that he knows, Disney, Netflix, whatever, and he watches it start doing well, I'm going to tell you, you'll see their eyes light up. It may go down, it may go up, but there's a sense of pride there. And if we can teach these kids at a young age to start doing this, it is a game changer. And I believe it's a game changer in much bigger issues, in race issues. We talk about systemic racism and people can't get ahead. Teach them financial literacy at a young age. They'll get ahead. Teach everyone at 18, 19, 20 years old how to save, how to invest. Teach them to set those financial goals early in life. If you can save even $5,000 to $10,000 by the time you're 24, 25, the options you're going to have down the road, the jobs you can take down the road, the ability to move on or take a risk increases exponentially. And that's where you get the opposite of systemic racism. You get generational wealth starting to build. People learn this. They have kids. They buy homes. Their kids learn it. It grows. It grows. It grows. Money doesn't care what race you are. It doesn't give a shit. Money's money. And if we can start teaching that to everybody, it's a step in the right direction. Steve, when do our elected officials take this class? It's a good question. I think I can say with confidence that those in Brantford have taken it. I don't know that those in other branches and levels of government have taken it. I can't say that for sure. But politics and economics go very, very closely. And I know many politicians that don't know shit about economics. Volker, remove the interest right now and then start reworking the education. Well, the education, I've said this before, and I have a friend of mine who does plays and does theater here, and he kind of called me out on it a little bit, but I stand by that I would take funding from other areas to make sure we have money for financial literacy. If we have to take money from some theater or the arts or our sports programs, I'm okay with that. Financial literacy should have been a priority. When we're doing English and math, part of that should be financial literacy. How do we go live in the real world without knowing how the real world works? Period. And we have the self-righteous telling us the system's broken and it's terrible. That's great, but it's reality. That's how it works. And if we don't know how it works, or we hate it so much that we're unwilling to learn it, then we'll never get ahead. To those that say, yeah, I don't like the system. There's flaws in the system, but I'm going to learn it, and I'm going to learn how to use it, and I'm going to get ahead. And when I get ahead, I'm going to come back and change the system. Those are the ones who actually have a chance to do so. Okay, it is 4:33, so I went on a little bit longer today. I'm sorry about that, but we'll be back tomorrow. I hope everyone has a great night. It's supposed to be a decent night, although our weather tomorrow is in question. If I have internet, I'll make sure I'm live again at 4 o'clock. Guys, I want to thank you for a great podcast. I hope you had a great weekend, and I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night.